My guest today is LaCroix. She's an expert in time management and helps people establish a work-life balance by setting boundaries and establishing routines. She's got a plethora of knowledge on the subject, and she will offer you tips you can implement starting today. Thank you for being here, Annie.
Thanks for having me.
You are about the most time-efficient person, and it makes sense since you're a time management consultant and you're a business owner and you're successful at all of these things. So I thought it would be interesting to have you here today to talk about how we can create a work-life balance, whether we're an entrepreneur or we're an employee, however that business or career side of our life looks, but also the boundaries we have to set in our personal life so that our business and personal life remain separate. But just time management overall, and you're the expert, so we'll get started. Tell us a little bit about your background. You're obviously a business owner, as I mentioned, and you've been a time management consultant. And what about those two things have really given you the energy and interest in helping people become more efficient? Because you could keep those skills for yourself, and that's a great thing, but you share those skills as well.
I would say probably because I am a workaholic, that's what I'm prone to. And because I have overworked and not had a life and not have had any time, and I really had to learn how to do that. When I see other people that can't seem to grasp time and can't seem to make time in their lives, I want to help them with that because this is not something that I knew how to do originally. It's something I learned, and I learned because I really had no life outside of my work. That's what I'm prone to. On a side note, I was also diagnosed with Meniere's disease years ago, and that was a product of being overstressed and overworked. So it was a health issue for me too, to be able to manage a good work-life balance.
Well, and that's what happens with a lot of us is we don't really make changes until something in our life blows up. And oftentimes it is our health.
Yes.
And what we're going to try to do for the people who are feeling overwhelmed and feeling like maybe it is affecting their health and the stress that they're taking on, these are the tips that you can utilize to really, really, truly turn that around. Turn that around today by the end of this half hour with the skills that you're teaching us.
Absolutely. We can do that.
Let's talk then. Okay, so let's get started with just in terms of, and like I said, entrepreneurs, busy parents, busy employees, whatever your career looks like, and what things, commitments to, your parents, commitments to your community, what is getting in the way of you creating a balance. And what would be the first thing that you'd say for people to just take a look? I mean, what is it happening to you physically? What are you feeling that gives your first tip that I need to make a change before you have a health crisis or some other thing that goes on that makes it harder to make that change?
Right. I think that's a great question. I think the biggest thing is if you're always have a sense of, I don't have time. I don't have time. I can't get that done. Always having a sense of being behind. And if you can check in and really feel that in your body and say, oh, like I always feel like I'm all balled up, just waiting to get the next thing done, and having a sense that you're going to miss something, that's probably the biggest sense of overwhelm, is wondering what you forgot, which I think we can all relate to. We can all relate.
Yes. Yeah. And I think too, when things are going on with your work and your personal life, you miss things. If I don't put it in my phone, it just isn't going to happen because I will forget. And sometimes I even put in show in my phone. And if I don't write down the person's name, I have to go back through emails to remember who I booked for that particular day, even though I might have just done it a couple of days ago, because I just don't hold that information like I might need to, or maybe I don't need to, as long as I put it in my phone correctly. So little things that we can do to be more efficient. So when I think about the stress that happens sometimes, now some of us work really, really hard for a while, put in a lot of hours, and then we get this kind of, and that's the way my life works. I'm working 16 hours, maybe 18 hours. Maybe I don't get up from my computer for 6, 10, 12 hours at a time. And then I have this period where I kind of relax. And what I've tried to do is learn to spread that out and not make it such a high, intensity to just this next to nothing for a while. And that's kind of, maybe as an entrepreneur, that's harder to do because nobody sets my schedule but me.
Well, I think you make such a good point here, is you do have to look at what phase you're in, right? So if you're an entrepreneur and you're a startup, you're obviously going to have to put in more time than you would put in years down the road. But you do want to be structuring yourself so that where you land is sustainable. So you might go through phases. You might have a big project to do. As an employee, you might have a big project that needs to get done, but is that how it always is? Or is it sustainable? And that's what we really want to be going for, is what I'm doing sustainable for the long haul? Can I do this for a long amount of time? And I want to make a point about that. You brought up earlier, it doesn't matter who you are. And I think that a lot of times we focus on entrepreneurs in this, but you made the point about employees. And employees sometimes need to have incredible boundaries if they work for people that don't have boundaries.
Sure. That's true.
So we can all use time management, because if you're working for somebody else and they're encroaching into your private life, that makes it your personal life, that makes it really difficult too.
When that's a really good point too, because we're going to keep saying that. That's a really good point. That's a really good point.
We have so many.
Making really good points today. One of the things too that I was thinking about when you were saying that is that sometimes, like, for example, we think about morning routines, and you got to get up at 5 and you've got to do your meditation and you've got to take your cold plunge. There's so many people who are in the grind right now, and a morning routine, or thinking that you can follow some of the gurus who are saying what they do, that helps them be more productive. Most of them were grinding it out at some point too. Right. And for me, I just work better later in the day.
Yeah.
I don't like to set an alarm. And so it doesn't mean I sleep till 10. It just means that I don't like to set an alarm to start my day. I wake up, I start my day, it gets going. So we really have to pay attention to our own personal clock and our productivity.
Yes. I am a huge fan of routine, and I can talk about routine for a second, but let me say this first. I think everybody should have a routine, and people resist that. I'll come back to that in a second, but the routine needs to be what works for you, not what works for somebody on Instagram, not what works for somebody who has assistants, who has people supporting them.
Yes.
And if the routine is that you get up at 9 or 5 or noon, and that's what works for you, then that's the routine you should have. If the routine is that you work for 2 hours and then off for 1, that's your routine. I could go on and on, but a routine is essential, and I'm happy to talk about that if you want me to. But this idea that we should be trying to model our routines off of other people is really problematic, and we usually get into this mode of not being able to make it work for us because it's not our routine. Getting up early, the one you mentioned, is the biggest example, because you're like, if you get up early and make your bed, your whole life will come together. Not if you don't like to get up early and or make your bed. I'm not a bed maker. Yeah. It's just not something that I feel like is important to do, and I'm okay.
Yeah, you're okay. You're one of the most productive people I know. Great. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to finish this thought and then go on to our next thought, just about what is the one thing we could start doing today that would really help us start not only building routines, but building efficiency in our lives. We'll be back in just a moment. We're back talking with Annie LaCroix. So, time management consultant. Let's talk about time management, whether we're an employee, an employer, an entrepreneur with a team, or just by ourselves. Right. What are some of the things for people watching today saying, okay, I did the tests. I feel overwhelmed a lot. I don't have time. I'm constantly telling people and myself I don't have time. So now you need to make a change. Right. What are 1 or 2 things that you could start right now today that would help you begin to make that time management switch?
Okay, the first number 1 thing is pick 1 day a week, hopefully 2, but let's start with 1 if you're super overwhelmed, that you protect. You block it off in your calendar. You don't schedule. I call them no-go days. I don't schedule anything on no-go days. And I mean anything. Now, this again is it depends on the person you are. For me, a no-go day is I'm not even socializing. I don't do anything. So 1 day that you protect.
So if you have to go to work, you go to work, but you don't plan on seeing somebody after work, or you don't even maybe plan to go to the grocery store or whatever. It's just that's a day that you don't commit to anything outside of what you want to do or need done.
Oh, you could do that. I'm saying 1 no-go day where you're off work. You have nothing.
So it's your Saturday or your Sunday.
It's your Saturday or your Sunday. If you work nothing, it's your Wednesday. You have no-go day. And there's a reason for that. 1, it's nice to have a time that you know is yours that's protected. But 2, if things do run over, there's a space each week to handle the most important thing. You don't want to use it that way. You don't want to use it as a catch-up day, because now it's not a no-go day. But if you have something that runs over that's crucial, you've already padded in time to take care of it.
Mm-hmm. And if you're someone so if you're an entrepreneur and you have that,
right,
it's really important, I think, especially because if you're someone who brings work home,
right,
it's really important to guard that time, because I can get on my laptop thinking I'm just going to check one thing.
Yeah.
And 3 hours later, I worked 3 hours on what I didn't call them no-go days, but a day I planned not to work.
Right. And on my no-go days, I don't look at my work email. Now, I could get into a lot more details, and maybe we can do this another time too, but it's also separating those things out. Like, my work email is a separate email from my personal email, and I simply don't look at it on a no-go day. I just don't look at it. And then people are also trained that I'm not going to reply to them on those days. Mm-hmm. So I don't, on my no-go days, I'm not having to think about not working because I'm not even looking at something that's work.
Yeah, so let's talk about the personal part, because you and I know each other personally. We've been friends for many years.
Yeah.
And you talked about your people are trained that you're not going to reply.
Right.
And I think that it's a real important skill to have, to teach people how to treat you and how to respect your time. Yep. So there have been times, because we're friends, where I might have said in the beginning, hey, what about this schedule for this to make an appointment with you through your business? And you're like, yep, send an email through the business. Like, we don't even talk about that stuff.
Right.
But really it's about teaching people how to respect those boundaries. Now, if you're someone who's married and has 4 kids, your no-go day is going to look much different than somebody who
totally
does it.
But maybe your no-go day is so that your family gets you uninterrupted.
Yes.
So the no-go day doesn't have to be, just for you, but it might be that they know mom's not going to get on her email for an hour. Mm-hmm. So the no-go day can certainly be just for that reason, but it should be one day there's nothing planned. And so you can, and maybe you wake up in the morning and then impromptu thing is we're all going to go to the zoo, but you don't have something else planned that doesn't allow you to do that. It allows for spontaneity at least one day, right? And that's sometimes for me, that spontaneity is going and doing something or cleaning my house. But sometimes that spontaneity is watching stupid TV.
Yeah.
And I can do it because I've made that decision.
It's guilt-free.
Right. It's guilt-free. I want to say something, though, about your point of then, like, when we've had interactions where I say, just email me. There are 2 reasons for that. One, yes, it is to teach people to not do work with me when I'm not at work, for sure. But the other reason is for you, is I could forget. And I don't want you, as my client, I don't want you to drop through the cracks. I don't want to forget about you and tell you I'm going to do something for you and then not be able to do it. So if it's in my email box, I'm protecting myself from forgetting, and I'm giving you the vehicle to make sure you get the best service you can from me. So it's kind of a twofold thing. And that, again, was learned from promising things to people on the fly. And now I just know myself well enough that I just tell people, you email that to me. Mm-hmm. Just don't verbalize it to me. Just email it and I'll remember better. So
what's the second thing?
Okay. The second thing is around your routine is I really like people scheduling everything. Now, people resist this, right? But schedule, here's a great example of how people get behind. If I work till 3:00, I can't have a meeting with you at 3:00.
Right.
I have to get to the meeting.
Right.
Or I have to switch gears. So people say, I'm done with work at 3:00. Let's meet at 3:00. You're now behind.
Right.
So I tell people, schedule everything and give yourself buffers. If you work from 8 to 3, put on your schedule 7:30 to 3:30. So the next time you're available, something is 3:30 to 5, and then put dinner. So if people, I always say you can't make time, but you can create space. So if you can create space in your schedule that gives you a buffer, you're never running late, you're never running behind because you've already put in that padding. And people do resist scheduling, but scheduling, I promise people, will help them create space to allow for more spontaneity. Yeah.
They think it's making it more rigid, but it actually allows you to be more flexible.
100%. Allows a ton of flexibility. I put everything, you mentioned this earlier, you put show on your calendar. Everything I do is in my calendar. Even my no-go days, it says no-go on those days. And
you block it out.
I just hit repeat on all my no-go days are Sundays, but I just hit repeat on my Sundays, and it's a no-go day. So, yeah, that's all on there.
It's good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back. Okay, we're back talking with Annie LaCroix. You are talking about time management, routines, but also about boundaries. So you gave us some good tips. You talked about having no-go days and then making sure we have a buffer in our schedule so that we, even though it seems more rigid to our schedule, it allows us to have more flexibility.
Right.
So for someone watching who's thinking, oh yeah, that sounds great, but the people in my life, whether it's their family, their employer, just their personality, even their own resistance to it, how do you start to set those boundaries? Because you're very good at it. I knew right away, okay, I will email Annie about business related things.
Right.
You taught me that. So what about the people who aren't comfortable setting those boundaries? How do you even begin to have that feel comfortable to you, or to stick to it when it feels uncomfortable until you get comfortable?
Well, that's a huge topic, but it's a great question. So I'll just say one of my favorite quotes is, your success in life is related to how many uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have. And I do not know who said the quote, so I apologize for the lack of attribution. But whoever, the number of uncomfortable conversations is related to your success. So I had to learn this the hard way, and I'm still not great at it. There's times that I really don't love it. I don't think any of us love setting boundaries. And I will tell you, the reality is you have to accept that people will not like that and will move on and find somebody else that does like that. And I am really okay with that. So I've had a few boundaries at my business where people have pushed back on them and resisted them, and I've lost them as clients. And that just, for me, means that the space has opened up for better clients that respect my boundaries.
True.
So
it opens up an opportunity for your people, your kind of people.
My kind of people. I will say, I never enjoy it. It's not that I love when it's time to set boundaries, but I have people that don't like them tend to move on from me, and I worry less. I'm not going to say I don't worry. I worry less about the receipt of my boundary than I used to. So here is what will work for me, and if that doesn't work for you and you need to move on and find a different business for this, no, we're all good. No hard feelings. Great, because you need to find somebody that can work with you, and I need to find somebody that I can work with. In personal lives, that's a little bit harder because obvious reasons. And if you're an employee, that's really hard because you might need that job. And so I can say something like, well, get a different job. I mean, you can say all that, but the reality is it's much harder. And sometimes you can just present it in a way that says, I really need my personal time. And when I'm here at work, I'm happy to do whatever you need, but I'd ask you to please not text me after when I'm not at work, for example. And then that's harder when you're an employee. I get that. But I try very hard to not be tied to the outcome and just be tied to my responsibility to put the boundary out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing too, is that it's hard when other people's emergencies become your emergencies. And it depends on the kind of business that you're in, whether it's truly an emergency, right? I remember way back in college, I was writing for a community newspaper, and the editor would cross boundaries all the time, just in terms of even the office space and different things. And one time he called me at 6:30 in the morning asking for a disc. This is how long ago it was, like a hard disk, floppy disk, whatever. Asking where it was when I'd clearly left it. I'd left it with a note. He just couldn't find it. So his emergency, by not following the instructions that I'd left him, made it to where he's calling me at 6:30 in the morning. And I was only at that job maybe 2 weeks more. Yeah. And it's because I set the boundary. And I just said, you can't call me at 6:30 in the morning when this is sitting there. Now, I was in college. It wasn't my big career job. Wasn't high pressure. We're talking about that, right? There's a lot of people who, I wouldn't make that same decision now. I might have handled it differently, but it does remind me of times coming up where I was starting to learn that and it makes it implementing it now a little simpler because it's not something I'm learning 25 years after my career started.
Right. And your point is, we don't want to also be rigid. There are times that I'll make an exception to my no-go day. There are times that I will answer an email because its importance is important enough to me too, right? Also, people's relationship with me and their history with me is different. A client that's been with me for 10 years is going to get a little bit more leeway than somebody that I just met last week because I want to set a precedent. So you can't be rigid, but it's good to have your guidelines and to stick with them as much as possible.
So we have 2 minutes left. So the last question I want to ask you about, I'm going to have you back to talk about routine in general.
Okay.
But how does routine and time management work I know it's a loaded question, but if you were to say one thing that is important for you to consider in your time management as you also try to establish your routine,
right,
what would be the one thing you would say?
You're authoring your schedule. You're not reacting to what's happening. You've created a routine and you are the proactive participant, the creator of that. And that will manage your time better than waiting to see how your day unfolds. If you create a routine and you create a schedule, you're determining what's going to fit in and what's not going to fit in. And most people do it the opposite way. They say, oh, I'll see what happens today. Right. So I would say that is how you bring it together. Routine will manage your time much better than reactivity will manage your time.
So when you're thinking about the routine of things, and I was just thinking, as you said, that we could have different routines on different days based on the work we're doing. It doesn't have to be like you're talking about being rigid. It doesn't have to be the same routine every day. You don't even really have to get up at the same time every day, although there's studies that say that's important. But you really can establish which days are the priorities. Like I really stack my early week.
Yes.
I record my show on Mondays and Tuesdays. Wednesday gets a little more lenient by Friday. If I don't work at all, I'm good. Because
let's talk about routine because there's a lot to what you're saying. Yeah. So we'll do another talk about this.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. And I wanted to say that when you surround yourself with people who set boundaries and you surround yourself with people who elevate you, like you being time management and you being really great at efficiencies and that communication, it has improved my quality of life in business and my personal life because you model it so well. And that goes to show those, all of the statistics and all the studies and all the even, anecdotal stories we read about who we surround ourselves with. I think that's what it's getting back to, is surrounding ourselves with people who either are like-minded or are above where we are right now in terms of their habits, their routines, anything that we're trying to establish in ourselves, because I'm not that great at it, but I've learned from you.
Well, and that's one thing I'm great at, and there's other stuff I'm not great at that you are. So we learn from each other, and that's, so I feel the same likewise. That's a great thing to have.
Surround yourself with people who elevate you.
That's right.
That's a whole other show.
That's a whole other show.
All right. Thanks for being here, Annie. I appreciate you.
Have a great day.